Hi, I'm Don Johnson. Again, I hope you saw our first tape. Again, our first tape was on arm swing, timing, the follow-through. In other words, the good physical things of the game to make you improve. Tape number 2, we're keying in on the release. Now, this game has changed a lot in the last 5, 10, 15 years. And the release is how we get the strike power. Again, I've had a lot of requests to do one on release, and you're going to see some things that you've never seen before. Hopefully, you're going to believe these things. Okay, a lot of people ask me, so why are you supposed to throw a hook? The reason you're supposed to throw a hook is so that you get some angle into the pins. For example, if the lane was 10 or 15 feet wide, we could stand all the way to the right and angle the ball into the pins. Therefore, you would not get much deflection. Let me explain it. A straight ball going straight down the lane, when it hits the 1-3, it is now going, in other words, when it hits the head pin, it's going to deflect to the right. Therefore, the ball is going to miss the 5 pin a lot of times. And a lot of you are leaving 5 pins out there. It's because you're getting too much deflection when the ball hits the pins. So actually what we want to do when we create a hook is to get some side turn on the bowling ball so that now it changes direction. Another reason why you want to throw a hook, and again, if you watch Pro Bowlers Tour, you'll see these big hook ball bowlers. They create area. In other words, they don't have to hit one specific spot to get to the pocket. They got 2 or 3 or 4 different boards they can hit to get to the pocket. And again, a lot of that has to do with lane condition, but if you got the revs and the rotation, you can create area. To understand the release is, first of all, understand how a bowling ball rolls down the lane. I like to explain the ball as being like the earth. If we was to go and get on the North Pole, and if you was to stand there and able to be to stand there for 24 hours, you would actually rotate or spin. In other words, you would turn around once every 24 hours. If we was on the equator, boy, you're going around real fast. Now, you wouldn't realize this because of the atmosphere. But basically, what we're going to do is call the North Pole our positive axis, and we're going to call the equator our ball track. Okay, now let me show you something down here. You'll notice here that your bowling ball, you have a ring around the ball. This is called the ball track. Now let me show you something very interesting. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line around your ball track. So what you want to do is take a grease pencil, and what we do is draw a line around your ball. Now this is actually the only part of the ball that touches the lane, is your ball track. And what you want to do is bowl in a bowling center that has some oil on it, or else you might have to move inside, in other words, more towards the 3rd or 4th arrow to find the oil on this ring. Okay, now we got this ball track. What we now have to discover is what is the positive axis and what is the negative axis. For a right-handed bowler, if you put your grip like this, the positive axis is for the right-hand side. A left-handed bowler, your positive axis will be on the left-hand side. So what we're going to do is take a tape measure here, and we're going to measure from one side of your track to the other. You notice that's approximately 15 inches, so half of that would be 7.5. So if we take and come over here and mark 7.5 inches and draw a line straight across the ball. Now turn it 90 degrees and measure it again. Measure from one side of the track to the other. And you need a little bit over 15, so we'll say it's a little bit over 7.5 inches. Now, where these two lines meet is going to be called your positive axis. Now, what we're going to do is we're now going to put a piece of tape on this positive axis, and when we have it roll down the lane, we're going to see where that tape is. Now, there's many ways of finding your axis. Again, for the right-handed bowler, if you put your hand in the ball from the top, the right-hand side is your positive axis, the left-hand side is your negative axis. We're not concerned about the negative. For a left-hand bowler, the left-hand side of his ball is his positive axis. Again, that's what we're concerned about. So me being right-handed, I'm going to put my hand in the ball, and this is the side we're going to mark. So this is a little version of how to find your axis, a very simple version. So you put your fingers on the edge of the ball track, and you approximately 180 degrees put your finger on the other edge of the ball track. Now if you look straight above the ball and try to level up your fingers as much as possible, and when you think you got them pretty level, you now draw a straight line on top of this bowling ball. You turn it 90 degrees. We're now going to find the edge of the track here, the edge of the track here with the fingers, and I'm going to actually try to level up my fingers as much as possible. Okay, when you think you got them pretty level, again, look straight above the ball and draw a line. Now you will have an X. And this X, if you put a piece of tape in this X, this will be called your positive axis. This is a little simple version. You might want to try this, or you might want to try the tape measure way. Again, try either one you like, see which one you like best. Okay, now all we're going to do now is put the piece of tape on your positive axis, just like that. Okay, we're going to put this ball up here near the foul line, and what we're going to do is actually visualize this ball as a clock. We're going to call this 12 o'clock, this will be 3 o'clock, this will be 6 o'clock, and this will be 9 o'clock. Now this is looking straight down at the ball at the foul line. Now if we go back here in the seats and look at this same ball, you will notice that the right-hand side of the ball will be called 3 o'clock, the ball that's facing us, the center of the ball will be called 6, the left-hand side will be called 9. You'll notice that we can't be seeing 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, or 2 o'clock because these are now facing the pins. Okay, now the center of the ball, a line straight up and down, is going to be called 6 o'clock. A line on this side will be called 9 o'clock. In other words, the extreme left-hand side of the ball is going to be called 9. The extreme right-hand side of the ball is going to be called 3. Now, in other words, this is 9. This line would be 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3. Now what we actually want to now discover that our tape or our axis tape is going to be approximately 2.5 to 3 hours difference from where our fingers are. For example, if I let go of the ball with my fingers on the side of the ball, the tape is going to be facing us. If my fingers came out from maybe 4 o'clock, the tape would be at 7 o'clock. And if the fingers come out at 5 o'clock, the tape would be at 8 o'clock. And if my fingers came straight out behind my bowling ball, you notice the tape is on the extreme left-hand side of the ball. Again, some of you will notice that your axis tracer is approximately 3 hours difference in the fingers. Some of you might be about 2.5. Now, when we get yourself and you bowl, you're going to find out where your tape is. It's going to tell you exactly where your fingers were when they came out of the bowling ball. What we actually want to do is to try to get that tape as close to the center of the ball as possible. Now, how a bowling ball rolls down there, if the tape was facing you, fingers coming out the side, the ball will be revoluting in this position with the tape facing you. And what we actually want to do is we want to see that tape stay in one position for approximately 30 to 40 feet. Then it will rotate, this is called rotation of axis, it will rotate to the side of the ball. Now let's get some definitions. Once your tape gets on the extreme left-hand side of the ball, that ball now is rolling end over end, and if it starts that way, it's a straight ball. And a lot of you have probably bowled where you saw your ball hook and then it goes straight. That's what we call rolling out. Another definition is where we actually would like to see the tape when it hits the pins is approximately 8:30. Therefore, it still has a little bit of side turn left on it. Therefore, it's going to drive into the pins. You do not want to see the tape facing you or 7 or 8 o'clock when it hits the pins because it's now going to deflect. If my hand was your axis and my finger was your ball track, your ball is actually going down the lane for approximately 30, 40 feet in this manner. Then what it actually do is your ball is now going to change from a side row mode to a forward row mode. Therefore, you will see your tape rotate to the left-hand side of the ball. And we want that to happen in the last 20 feet. And what we want that to be is approximately 8:30 when it hits the pins. Again, if it starts facing you and say at 20 or 30 feet, it's already to the left-hand side of the ball, we've got one of two problems. Either you're throwing the ball way too slow or you do not have enough revolutions. Now, we're going to talk about those two subjects a little bit later. But what we have to discover is how to try to get the fingers more on the side to get the tape to face you, because a lot of you are going to find out that your tape is starting, say, at 8:30 or at 8 o'clock. Well, therefore, it's going to take that much sooner to get to a 9 o'clock or a roll-out position. So what we have got to try to do now is to learn how to try to get the tape to face us. Now, one little elementary way of doing this is, instead of putting your hand basically behind the ball, is maybe put your hand more on the side of the ball. And if you mentally think to try to keep it on the side all the way, that would allow our fingers to be on the side of the ball, and that tape will actually face you. Now, here's what most of you are going to do. By thinking staying on the side, you're going to bring it back on the side, and then it's going to mentally go back here behind where it normally is, because that's where you've always felt it. But hopefully it's going to help you turn back to the side in the turn area. Now remember, this is the area that we want to turn in. We're going to call this the turn area. So if you had your hand behind the ball and you brought it back, and as we got down here about waist to knee high, we now want to turn to the side of the ball. Now that brings us into another thing, is what is the side of the ball? And I want to demonstrate what the side of the ball is. A lot of people, when they bowl, they think they're on the side of the ball. That is not the side of the ball. The definition of the side of the ball is have the fingers in the center of the ball up and down, and the fingers center of the ball front to back. That is actually the side of the ball. That is not the side of the ball, and that is not the side of the ball. That's the side of the ball. And if you was to get your hand, and that was to be in that position at release, believe me, this tape will face you, and you will now have a chance to get some rotation in your axis. Okay, I'm probably going to mention this once or twice more in this film, but it's very, very important we understand this, that this axis tape that we're putting on our axis, you have to take this off in your league. You're not allowed to have a foreign substance on the outside surface of the ball. So basically what we're going to do is take this off in your league and put this axis tracer on in your practice sessions to try to work on your release. Now once you get your track where it's real good and you like your release, you can go to the pro shop and they'll drill a little hole there in your axis, and you can actually paint the inside of that hole, and it's perfectly legal. So some of you might want to do that a little later on once you get the release down real good. If we still don't have the release down and you still don't have that tape maybe 6 or 7 o'clock, and again that's the area we're trying to look, is trying to get the tape close to the center of the ball. If we're still having problem doing that, we might have to do now what's called an over-exaggeration. Now let me explain something about an over-exaggerated mental thoughts. Usually they're very good for instant success, but if you keep thinking about it, then it can be over-exaggeration. For example, if we was to say, starting our fingers at 3 o'clock, hopefully he's going to get the tape at 6. If we still see it at 8, you might now try to start your hand, maybe fingers at 2 o'clock, and see if your tape faces a little bit more. If that don't work, you might try it at 1 o'clock. The point is, if you was to think your fingers are at 1 o'clock, and you brought them back and you tried to keep them there all the way. Now your subconscious brain wants your hand behind the ball, so now your fingers might go to maybe at least 4 o'clock at release, so the tape will at least start at 7 o'clock. So you might want to try some of these exaggerations. Now let me explain that if you start at 1 o'clock and you tried to stay there at 1 o'clock, eventually you would start doing that. It might take a month or two. All of a sudden now the tape starts on the right-hand side of the ball, and basically this is called topping the ball. When the fingers come out in front of the thumb, you top it. So that's no good either. We do not want the tape on the right-hand side. We want it close to the center. So when you try this exaggerated mental thought, if you try it, once your tape gets in the center, back off. In other words, once it gets over there on the right-hand side, you're topping it, you're going to have to back off an hour or two at a time until you get it back into the center of the ball. But that might be a little over-exaggerated mental thought that might help some of you out there. Notice the tape is around 7:30 at the arrows, and you will see it go down with a lot of revolutions, and it will rotate to approximately 8:30 at the contact of pins. This is what we're going to call the hit mode. Now here's Ray Edwards, a left-handed pro bowler. You notice his tape is starting in the center, 6 o'clock, and being left-handed, it's going to rotate to the right-hand side of the ball. So we see it at 3:30 at the contact of the pins. Now, if we put Ray in a mirror, make him a mirror image here, and show him as a right-handed bowler, you will notice the tape starts at 6 o'clock, and you will see that it's going to rotate to the left-hand side. In other words, it's going to be at 8:30 at the contact of pins. Here's a picture of a straight ball. Notice we hardly see the axis tracer at all here. Again, this ball is rolling end over end with very little pin action. Now this again is a little bit different subject, and it's going to be called tilt of your axis. Now you'll notice that the lines are a little bit different. For example, the top of the ball we're going to call 12 o'clock. The center of the ball going through here we're going to call 9 o'clock, and the bottom of the ball we're going to call 6 o'clock. Again, we cannot see 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 because that's facing the pins. Where we're going to see our tape, our axis tape, up and down is now going to be called the tilt of our axis. For example, if we see your tape way up here on top of the ball, say at 11 o'clock, you are now throwing what's called a spinner. And again, this is a very small track, and the ball is not able to grip the lane. Now let me explain, in the old days, on the shellac and the lacquer conditions, a spinner was actually an asset. I won a lot of titles throwing a spin type, maybe a 10:30 or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock tilt. But let me tell you, on today's lane conditions, high tilt is not an asset. Okay, now I've turned the ball here where you can actually see your axis tracer. We would like to see the axis tracer start approximately in the center, up and down. If we see this axis tracer start way up here, we are now spinning the ball. Now spinning the ball means that you're turning the ball on the upswing. Okay, you're taking and you're spinning, you're turning the ball. In other words, the ball would be kind of released like this. If I take and turn on the up, you will see that that ball is spinning. It's spinning like a top. Okay, and the axis on that is right here on the top of the ball. Now, for a ball to be going forward, it's impossible to have the axis tracer dead on the top of the ball. It will actually be slightly below the top. In other words, approximately a full spinner would be 11:30 to 11 to 10:30. That area there is really spinning the ball. That's turning on the up. If we have the problem of the tape being real high on the ball and you're throwing what we call this spinner, it again is caused by turning on the upswing. In other words, we're basically topping the ball. Very possibly you're topping it. What we want again to do is to turn to the side of the ball in the turn area. Once we get to this area, we don't turn anymore. We're going to come straight up. Again, we're going to talk about the urethane release a little bit later. You're going to see it's even a little bit different. But right now, we want to turn in the turn area and then don't turn anymore. A spinner is caused because you're turning on the upswing. Now, a lot of times you'll see when a person spins it, their thumb goes down. So that would be a good mental thought, how to correct this problem. Is if you had your hand and got to the side of the ball, think that your thumb goes up. Now you can't top the ball or spin the ball as much. So that's a good thought, is to think the thumb comes up on the upswing. In other words, another thing is if that still don't work, you might want to think that your palm comes up. Okay, but if your palm has always went down because you threw a spinner, if you think palm up, at least now your palm might be on the side of the ball. Okay, again, those two things might help you stop this spinner. See how that ball looks like it's spinning down the lane? Now key in on the fingers. Watch how the fingers go in front of the thumb. Now this makes us top the ball, which gives us very little pin action. What we basically want to do is get the tape basically in the center of the ball, sideways, which is our rotation, and we want to get it here in the center of the ball, up and down, which is going to give us a nice semi-roller. If we have the tape way down here on the bottom of the ball, this is going to be because you're throwing a full roller or an overturned full roller. Okay, I'm going to try to demonstrate here what a full roller would look like. Again, if we key in on the hand, and at release, you're going to see that I give it some clockwise rotation. See how my palm went up? Again, we're going to watch in slow motion from back view. Now watch the hand action. See how my hand turned in a clockwise rotation? Again, this creates a full roller. Here we see the low tilt. See that tilt down there around 7:30? Again, this is very low tilt, and this is what gives us this full roller. Some of you frustrated full rollers out there and you've been brainwashed here thinking, hey, I can't be a 200 or 210 or 215 average bowler with a full roller. A lot of that is brainwash. I know a full roller in South Dakota who averages 215. He's had several 300 games and several 800 series. But you know why he has them good scores? Because he still has rotation of axis. So it might not be the problem being your full roller. It might be the problem is you don't have rotation of axis. Now let me explain that. A full roller is released with your hand on the side of the ball, and as you get to the turn area, you actually now turn the opposite direction. You actually are turning in a clockwise direction. For example, if my fingers were at 3 o'clock, and I came to this area, and I turned the opposite direction, my fingers actually would come out at 4. Now my axis tracer would be at 7 as far as the rotation. If my fingers were at 4 o'clock coming down, and I got to the turn area and went from 4 to 5, now I only have an 8 o'clock rotation. Some of you full rollers might want to try this little trick. On the downswing, if you'll actually think your fingers are a little bit in front of the thumb, then when you turn that hour of clockwise rotation, you're actually going to be having your fingers from 2 and go to 3. You're still going to throw that full roller, but by your fingers leaving the ball at 3, your axis tracer will now be facing us. Therefore, you'll have good rotation of axis. Now, one of my best friends from my hometown in Kokomo, Indiana, threw a full roller. And when we first started in professional bowling in the early 60s, believe me, this fellow was much better than I was. His name was Carl Babb, but he threw a full roller. And I saw him leave 9, 10 pins in a row in a game where he hit the pocket every time the first 9 frames and never got a strike. And again, a lot of that was from lack of rotation. We always thought, hey, it's the full roller. So the key is for some of you full rollers who want to try to keep your full roller and try to get more pin action is to think our fingers are a little bit in front of the thumb coming in, and then have your hand turn that 1 hour clockwise rotation to get your fingers that leave at 3 o'clock. Now you'll still have your full roller, but now we will have some rotation. Now some of you full rollers who want to change, let me explain how to change that. Again, the secret is not putting your hand on the side here underneath this ball at stance, because here's what most full rollers do. Full rollers put their hand here to try to change, and once they get past their leg, their subconscious brain still makes them go back to the side of the ball. So therefore, they're already on the side, and they are going this 1 hour clockwise rotation, which causes a full roller. So basically, to change, here's how I've tried to change a lot of my students that want to change from a full roller to a semi-roller, is put their hand actually the opposite position. Put it on the side of the ball. And as the ball comes by the leg, and as it comes into the top of the swing, we now want to open up the forearm, which will open up the hand, which will now put the hand on the other side of the ball. Now when we come into this area, we now have a chance to turn the ball in a counterclockwise rotation and turn it in the turn area. This will now become a semi-roller. If we have our hand and we do not turn it at all, have zero turn in this area, the ball will now tend to go over the thumb hole. So to correct that problem, if we will take the hand and open the hand up a little bit, and as we now can be in an open position, now you'll have a chance to turn it. So some of you have the problem of going over the thumb hole. What we're actually going to do is think on the downswing, we're going to open up the hand a little bit. And a lot of that can be controlled by the forearm. If we'll open up the forearm a little bit, in fact, if you'll watch on Pro Bowlers Tour, you'll see several of the pros where their hand is actually in a backup position. Amoletto Monticelli, to me, has one of the best releases on Pro Bowlers Tour, and his hand is in this position. This allows him to wait for the turn area to turn the ball. He turns the ball in this area right here. Therefore, it does not go over the thumb hole. Mark Roth is another player who has the hand on the other side of the ball, and they turn in the turn area. This will get you off the thumb hole. Okay, most of the Pro Bowlers on Pro Bowlers Tour throw what is called a semi-roller. This, first of all, define a semi-roller, is a ball that rolls outside the holes, approximately half an inch to an inch and a half from the holes. This is going to be called a semi-roller. A spinner is a ball that rolls maybe 3 to 4 inches away from the holes, and a full roller is a ball that rolls between the holes. So what we'd actually like to do is create a nice semi-roller. Now that is created by maybe an hour or two of turn in the turn area. rotate. This gets the ball off the thumb hole, and we are turning in a counterclockwise rotation and bringing the hand up. This will give us a nice semi-roller, because the semi-roller is scoring the best of all the ball rolls today. We're going to show some examples here of the semi-roller. Now the key is the hand. What we're going to do is key in on the finger position, and right here you're going to see me turn to the side of the ball. And again, being right-handed, I am turning in a counterclockwise rotation with the hand. Again, watch the finger position right here. See how it turned to the side of the ball? This is what gives us that good semi-roller. Now here's what it looked like from the left-hand side. Again, this is Ray Edwards, pro bowler. Watch his finger position, turn to the side of the ball. See it? That's what gives him that nice pin action. Here's a close-up picture of it. See the fingers on the side? Okay, basically there's three factors then on the tilt of our axis. The first factor is our hand action on the upswing. For example, if my hand was in this position and I turned it in a counterclockwise rotation on the up, the more I do that, the higher the tilt, meaning a spinner. If I have my hand on the side and go in a clockwise rotation, this actually lowers the tilt, meaning the ball over the thumb hole or a full roller, or actually ball on the other side there. So that actually lowers the tilt. The second big factor on tilt is the wrist position. Now let me explain one thing here. If I had a straight line from my fingers through my forearm versus what is going to now be called a cocked wrist. Now on Pro Bowlers Tour, they go from a cocked wrist to an uncocked wrist during release. But if that wrist stays cocked during release, that can cause a higher tilt. Now let me demonstrate. If I was to put my fingers on a straight line through here, from a straight line through my forearm, notice the height of the tape. I am now going to cock the wrist. Now watch how high the tape goes. So if you have a cocked wrist during release, it can cause a high tilt. The third factor of tilt is releasing the ball on the downswing versus releasing on the upswing. When we tend to release the ball on the downswing, it can cause a little higher tilt. Now let me demonstrate. If I was to release the ball on the down, do you see how high the tilt is? If I hang onto the ball and release the ball on the up, it lowers the tilt. So those are the three basic factors on the tilt of your axis. What we basically want to try to do is to get the tape close to the center of the ball, up and down, and try to get the tape in the center of the ball sideways. That would be a nice place to start our axis tracer. Okay, in tape 1, we talked about the different kinds of swings. If you recall, we talked about the straight swing, the tuck swing, the in-out swing, and the loop swing. What I want to try to do now is show you the hand actions that match these types of swings. Okay, for example, the straight swing. The straight swing is very minimum hand action. For example, if you was to start your hand, say 4 or 5 o'clock at stance, it would stay in that position all the way back and all the way through. Very minimum hand action. Again, that will match a straight swing. The key again to that straight swing was to be a very accurate bowler, but we're not going to get a bunch of pin action unless we put some hand action in. Now you'll notice the swing does not have very much movement in the back, so this would be a good hand action if you wanted to have the straight swing. Now let's first of all go to the in-out swing and show the hand action for the in-out swing. The hand action for the in-out swing basically is we start the hand in what we call an open position. In other words, the fingers may be over here on a clock, say 7 or 8 o'clock. And what they do is they keep their hand in that position all the way back and all the way through, and then we get to the zone we're going to call the turn area. So therefore this individual's got his hand open for this in-out swing, and as he gets down here about waist to knee high, we are now going to turn the fingers to the side of the ball. Again, this is going to give us good rotation. Let's talk about the tuck swing. The tuck swing, again, if we start our fingers maybe at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock at stance, We keep him there until we get near the top. Then we're going to open the hand up. We're going to open the hand up, and we're going to be in that same position, and when we get to the turn area, we're now going to turn to the side of the ball. Tuck swing, you'd put your fingers maybe 5 or 6 o'clock at stance. They stay in that area, and when you get near the top, we will now open the hand so we now can turn in the turn area. How about the loop swing? The loop swing, and I've had several letters to me and asked me, why does my hand go in this position? It's called figure 8 hand action. And what figure 8 hand action basically is you start your hand under the ball, and when you push the ball out, your hand goes a little bit on the side, and then as it comes back, your hand actually goes in front of the ball. But then when it gets back here, it goes back to the side, back to behind, and now we can turn in the turn area. And if you'll notice, it's kind of like drawing an 8, like an ice skater. When they have the figure 8 ice skating, you see here, it looks like an 8. Well, that's what you want to actually do when you have a loop swing. So this figure 8 hand action would match your loop swing. The whole key is to be able to have your hand open so you could turn in the turn area. The hand actions that you really don't want is if your hand's behind the ball and you bring it back straight, and at the top of the swing you turn to the side. This is what we call turning the ball early. Now we get where we can't turn it in the turn area. And usually this causes a pop-out swing and possibly reverse loop swing, is turning the hand to the side at the top of the swing. So we don't want to do that. Another one we don't want to do is have your hand open and bring it back, and as you get near the top, then go to the side of the ball. We do not want these kind of hand actions. The reason being is when we come down, we now are already on the side, so you cannot turn in the turn area. Therefore, if you come and turn it, you end up topping the ball. Again, the key area to turn is here. So we're going to now call this the turn area, and we're going to call this area the lift area. Now, let me explain, that's a little bit different than a lot of you were taught how to bowl several years ago. And I kind of call it the difference between a lacquer release and a urethane release. In the old days, we had a softer finish, and it was called lacquer. And the object of the game back then was to stay in the ball track. In other words, go more or less down and in. Some of the greatest bowlers of all time, Don Carter, Billy Hardwick, they went down and in. And the object of that kind of hand action is they stayed behind the ball, basically, and then they come here, and then they lifted and then turned. Well, the release of today is definitely different. The release of today is not going to be lift-turn. It's going to be called turn-lift. The reason is the finishes are much harder today, and we kind of implement this in what we're going to call a little bit later the urethane-type release. Is you're going to turn the ball in the turn area, then we're going to lift the ball on the upswing. Here we see Ray. Now watch how he's going to turn to the side. Now he lifts it. So what we want to do is wait. We got to wait on the turn. We got to wait until that ball's about waist to knee high, and then we turn it. There's only one problem here, is we don't have eyes in the back of our head, and a lot of people think their hand's in one position, and it's really not. So if you'll tape yourself on a player and show it back on your video player, you'll be able to see that. Or if you got a friend of yours, have him try to visualize where your hand is, and so he can tell you where your hand is. The point is, we don't want to turn the ball early. Okay, this can cause that bad swing, cause a sidearm swing, reverse loop swing, a pop-out type swing. We're going to wait on the turn, wait till it's about waist to knee high, and we're going to turn in that turn area and then come lift the ball straight through. Okay, our next big factor in release, and this is a very, very important factor, and again, we'll call it lift, or putting revolutions on the bowling ball. First of all, if you was to look in the Webster Dictionary, the first definition of lift is an upward motion. And one little example I try to explain that to people is if I had a suitcase here. I can pick this suitcase up from the top strictly because they invented a handle. But you take the handle off the suitcase, I now would have to come underneath the suitcase to pick it up. In other words, lift is from under to up. That's our first definition. Now, we have several kinds of lift. For those of you who want to be strokers and not throw the big, powerful strike ball, we are going to probably try to give you what's called firm wrist lift. Now, what firm wrist lift is this. If we have a firm wrist, in other words, a straight line from the forearm through the wrist, what actually happens if your hand is in that position is the ball will actually fall off the thumb onto the fingers. So that would be one definition of lift, is the amount of time in fractions of a second between the ball leaves the thumb and when the ball leaves the fingers. Again, this will give us maybe 13 or 14 revolutions on the bowling ball. Now the big crankers type lift is completely different. But again, we're going to pick out, some of you people are going to pick out what's called the firm wrist lift, and the other people are going to pick out the big crankers type lift. Again, we have to decide that among yourselves. Now the most revolutions I've ever seen on a bowling ball, believe it or not, was at a bowling camp of a 70-year-old lady, and she had 22 revolutions. Point is, it took 4.5 seconds for the ball to get to the other end, and the revolutions were just end over end over end. Therefore, the ball still deflected when it hit the pins. So we have several factors here. You have rotation of your axis, you have the tilt of your axis, and you have revolutions on a bowling ball, and the next one obviously would be your ball speed. Her ball was so slow, she did not get a bunch of pin action, plus it was all forward revolutions. So we want to get the revs, and we want them to get them to going sideways so we still have good revolutions. But actually, what actually happens here is the ball falls off the thumb. The next thing, basically, if you push with your index finger, and your index finger will curl, the ball is actually hanging on the bowling fingers, and then the bowling fingers catch the index finger. Okay, while we're tucking on this firm wrist lift, I'm going to show you a lot of problems a lot of you have out there. And I want to use the assistance here of Carol. Carol, would you come in here a second? Now I want to show you here that Carol, if I kept her a straight line from the arm through the wrist area, if I kept it a straight line, I want to show you something. Look at her fingers. Her fingers go backwards. These are what we call collapsed fingers. Therefore, if you have one of these bowling gloves that only go from here to here and your fingers go back, you need one that is longer, and it's called an extension. This glove here happened to be called a Gladiator by Robbie's, and I just want to put this on here for her, and I want to show you the difference and how much firmer her wrist and fingers can be and how much more lift she could actually get on the bowling ball. Now notice that when I pull back on her fingers, nothing moves. See, that still stays on a straight line. So those of you who have problems with the fingers going backwards, you might want to try getting one of these longer gloves that go to the end of your fingers, and this will really help you get some firm wrist lift. Thank you, Carol. Now, for those of you who have problems cocking the wrist, there's a glove out that really helps those individuals, and it's called the Striker. Now, what this Striker, in fact, I went to the gentleman that made the Striker and have him put a couple versions on it, and he made it longer here so that you could not cock the wrist as much. Now, I want you to notice here my hand. See how much I can cock the wrist? If I put this glove on and try to do that same thing, you're going to see that I can't cock that wrist near as much. Look. See, I can't cock the wrist as much. So again, if you have problems with the cocked wrist, which can actually cause them fingers to be in the top half of the ball, you might want to try a couple of these different bowling aids that could help your bowling. Again, these are for you if you want to have the firm wrist lift. Now, for years and years and years, what I thought lift was, and what many people think lift is cupping your wrist on the upswing. Well, believe me, folks, that is the last thing the pro bowlers do on Pro Bowlers Tour. I actually studied films to come up with this new type of cranker type lift, which we're going to tell you right now. Now, some of these things are going to sound really weird, but we're going to show them so that you can see that these actually happen. First big factor is the wrist cups on the downswing. Okay, the wrist cups on the downswing. And actually what that means is we're going to take the arm and divide it into three parts. You got your hand, you got your forearm, and you got your upper part of the arm. If this was all in a straight line, remember we want the nice push away and you bring the arm back straight. From the top of the swing, what the guys that you see on Pro Bowlers Tour is winning all this money, what they actually are doing, they are accelerating their fingers from the top. For example, if I made my fingers go down, you'll notice my wrist cups. Okay, see that? I push down with my fingers, it makes the wrist cup. What actually they do that so hard, it brings us into factor number 2. It makes their arm bend on the downswing. Now, I went to Bob Hanley once. I said, Bob, how did you learn how to throw that big, strong bowling ball? And you know what his answer was? His answer was, I got tired of leaving the 5-pin in junior league. And I thought that was a great answer. The point is, when he did this, acceleration with the fingers, he did it harder and harder, and all of a sudden his arm started bending. He really wasn't aware, and he's still probably not aware how much his arm is bent. But what this actually does, and folks, this is the biggest factor of getting lift, is it gets the fingers in the bottom half of the bowling ball at the bottom of the swing. That is your big secret of getting lift. If I come in with a collapsed wrist, my fingers now are in the top half of the bowling ball. How can I lift it? Okay, a lot of people try to lift it by cupping on the up. They might have 8, 9, or 10 revolutions on a bowling ball. The point is, if it's cupped coming down at the bottom of the swing with a bent arm, the fingers now are definitely lower in the bowling ball. And there's a little demonstration I like to show people. First of all, 3 of the greatest bowlers who ever lived bowled with bent arms. Don Carter, Billy Hardwick, and Earl Anthony. They all had bent arms. Okay? So they basically were strokers. They kind of leaned forward and pushed the ball, but they did have bent arms. Okay, I want to just show you something here about this arm. If I had a straight arm and a firm wrist, that is actually the same thing as a bent arm and a collapsed wrist. Now I want you to watch my hand here versus the shoulder. See, that's actually the same position with the hand. Okay, what if I now had a straight arm and a cupped wrist? That basically is the same thing as a bent arm and a firm wrist. Again, watch my hand position. Notice the hand's basically the same place versus the shoulder. So the ultimate bowling ball, and what you see a lot of them crankers on Pro Bowlers Tour do, is they actually have a bent arm and a cupped wrist. Now let's just look at the hand positions versus the shoulder. If my arm is bent and I had a cupped wrist, notice my palm is facing up. If I had a straight arm and a cupped wrist, my palm is now facing approximately 45 degrees forward. If I had a straight arm and a firm wrist, now you'll notice my palm is facing the pins. And the worst position is a straight arm and a collapsed wrist. You notice my palm is now facing the floor. Some of the people that I've filmed at our advanced bowling school to learn how to get better have actually had what we call a hyperextended arm and a collapsed wrist coming into the release. In other words, the arm is actually bent backwards a little bit with the collapsed wrist. Look where them fingers would be on the bowling balls, right on the top. So therefore, that's the strongest position, and that is the weakest position. Now, one fellow that came to our advanced school to learn how to do this, we showed him this presentation. Again, we used some visual aids to show these things actually in action. And he went right out there and did it. I said, well, you're the only one I've ever seen be able to do that in 2 shots. He did it once with his thumb out and once with the thumb in, and he went right out there and did it. I said, now what did you think to do that? And here was one of his good mental thoughts, is when the ball got at the top of the swing, instead of accelerating with this top part of the arm, what he did is just let the ball fall from the top. He did not let this part of the arm come down. He let the ball come down. Well, if you notice, that automatically is bending his arm and allowed his fingers to get lower in the bowling ball. So these are some little tricks you might want to try. Now here's one little demonstration that we want to show you to learn how to do it. And we have a code word that we use, and the code word is called BAM. B-A-M. And BAM means bend arm more. Okay, I just got me a little 8-pound bowling ball here just to show you how to learn how to do this. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put my fingers in the ball, and I'm not going to put my thumb in. Now, to hold this ball without a thumb, I would have to cup my wrist. You understand? Now, I have a straight arm and a cupped wrist. But if I keep my arm straight and keep the wrist cupped, when I swing this back, the ball would fall out of my hand. So what we're actually going to learn how to do is we're going to learn how to cup the wrist and bend the arm. Now, if you'll notice now, by bending the arm, I can now swing the ball. Notice where my hand is in the bowling ball. My fingers are definitely in the bottom of the bowling ball. And what you would do is you just go up to the foul line, put your foot near the left-hand channel, cup the wrist with no thumb, and we're going to swing it a few times, and you're going to let go of it. and you're going to see your ball get revolutions that you've never seen before. The reason, again, is this. Your fingers are now lower in the bowling ball, which can put lift on that bowling ball. Okay, when we're in this factor of accelerating the fingers from the down, I want to show you a lot of problems people have out there. Is what they have, especially those of you who've had the tendency of having that incomplete push and that late timing, is when you get the ball here and it's still going up as you're starting your last step, what you now do is you thrust with the top part of your arm, and that actually makes you collapse the wrist. Okay, here's an example of what a collapsed wrist looks like. Now notice the wrist position. See how the finger's in the top half of the ball? Remember, the crankers on Pro Bowlers Tour accelerate the fingers, not the top part of the arm. Therefore, they bend their arm this way. If you think the opposite and thrust this, that wrist automatically will collapse. Another thing is if you happen to be on the side of the ball and you thrust this, this also makes you cock that wrist coming down into the downswing. So again, that can make the fingers higher in the ball, which prevents the big revolutions on your bowling ball. Step number 3 is really going to sound weird to you. And what it is step number 3 is the wrist goes from cupped to collapsed on the upswing. Now, I know that does not make any sense. But after studying Pro Bowlers Tour and studying all these guys that's making the big money on Pro Bowlers Tour, and found out that that's one of the denominators that gives them revolutions. What you're actually doing is you're actually putting revs on the ball in the air before it actually hits the lane. Now, to demonstrate that, what I would do is grab a light ball here. Again, I am going to put my fingers in only. I'm going to cup the ball. I'm going to bend the arm. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull the fingers from the bottom of the ball to the back of the ball to the top of the ball. Now, see how my wrist collapses? Now, let me just show you how this ball revs right here. I'm going to take and I'm going to collapse the wrist on the up. Now take a look at this right here. See that ball rev? We're now going to watch this in slow motion. Now watch how my wrist goes from cupped to collapsed, and watch the revs on this bowling ball. See the stars on that ball turn over and over? It went backwards and accelerated to me. And again, I was just trying to show you how many revs, how many times that ball can actually turn over. Now I've given this a little nickname. And again, I've got this nickname by one of my students that came to my advanced school to learn how to do this, and he started doing this move real good. And I said, now what does it feel like that you're doing? And his answer was, he says, it feels like I'm pushing with the palm and I'm pulling with the fingers. Now to explain it, if I had a hinge here, okay, if I had a hinge on my hand right here, if the palm went forward, you see the fingers actually go backwards. So it's actually push, pull. Now, some of you might do this better thinking pushing with the palm. Some of you might do better thinking pulling with the fingers. Some of you might do it better thinking both, push, pull. Now, there's another little term that I give this move, and that's called the drag racer. And what that means is if you saw that ball, it sat there on this approach, and it was revoluting, like the tires on a drag racer. At the starting line, you see the smoke fly from them tires from the friction of that pavement. When that drag racer gets at the other end, you don't see all that smoke from them tires because they're finally picking up with the pavement. So those are the two little nicknames that I've given move number 3, is push, pull, and the drag racer. Now let's talk about move number 4. Move number 4 is the wrist goes from cocked to uncocked. Okay, it goes from cocked to uncocked on the upswing. And it's kind of like throwing a Frisbee. Has anybody got a Frisbee over there? Oh, look at that. I even caught it. What you actually do with the Frisbee is you actually go from a cocked wrist to an uncocked wrist to put revolutions on this Frisbee. Now, let me show you that if I kept my wrist cocked all the way, that Frisbee can't even go 5 feet. But if I take that Frisbee and go from cocked to uncocked, see how far that goes? It goes a long ways. What I've actually done is put revolutions on the Frisbee, which makes the Frisbee stay in the air longer. Now, I think the first person who learned this move was my doubles partner when I was in the PBA, Paul Caldwell. Now, we won the ABC doubles, we won the PBA doubles, we won the PBA regional doubles. We really were good doubles partners. We bowled good together. But his nickname was Frisbee. And he had a little bit of this movement in his hand. Now, I really think that he was the first one that came up with this part of the release. Again, a very successful bowler. Again, the action is from cocked to uncocked. Now, one thing here, and I want everyone at home to put your hand in this position. I'll prove something to you, that I can't go from cocked to uncocked if it stays cupped. Impossible. The only way it could go from cocked to uncocked is I have to collapse the wrist. So therefore, move number 3, the wrist going from cupped to collapse, allows for move number 4, the wrist going from cocked to uncocked. Now let's talk about move number 5. Move number 5 is created by move number 3. Remember, move number 3 is the wrist goes from cupped to collapsed on the upswing. So what that actually happens is it makes the arm go from bent to straight. So that's move number 5, is the arm goes from bent to straight on the upswing. And it's created by the push-pull or the collapsing the wrist on the up. Move number 6 is created by move number 4. Remember, what's move number 4? Move number 4 is the wrist going from cocked to uncocked. And what that actually does is lets the elbow go in. Now, in tape number 1, we talked about that dreaded flying elbow. Well, I'm here to tell you another reason that can cause the flying elbow is cupping the wrist and making your fingers go left on the upswing. See my elbow go out? If I uncock my wrist, see that elbow go in? That is, again, a big key of getting the revolutions. So it's basically the uncocking of the wrist makes the elbow go in, and we don't have this flying elbow. Now, a little demonstration here, again, I'm going to show you, is I'll take this light ball, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hand, will bend my arm and cut my wrist and put my hand under, and what I'm going to do is collapse the wrist, and you're going to see my elbow go in, and again, this ball will have a lot of revolutions on it. Watch this. See the revs on that ball? Again, watch one more time and watch the wrist collapse and the elbow go in. See this elbow? We're now going to watch in slow motion. When I collapse and uncock that wrist, that elbow will go in. Again, I had to view a lot of pictures from Pro Bowlers Tour to come up with these big 6 key denominators. Again, you're not going to read these in any book. Okay, now we've talked about this firm wrist lift, and we say basically that's for strokers. Now, we don't really want to put an age group here, but those of you who are 30 or 40 or older, I think you should try to go with this firm wrist lift. The new generation that's coming, now you're going to be interested in some new things called the urethane release. And what I want to do is call my son in here. Jimmy, come in here. Now, here my boy is. He's 17 years old, and believe me, he's going to be demonstrating this new urethane release. Now, what we're basically going to get in is the big 6 key denominators to get the big revolutions. And when we talk about revolutions, a little later we're going to show you how to count revolutions, we're going to find out that Jimmy gets 18, 19 revolutions on that bowling ball. And that's like the bowlers on Pro Bowlers Tour. You'll see a lot like the John Gants and the Bob Hanleys. These guys get the big revs on the ball that makes them pins do the dancing. Notice the wrist. You do not see the big cupped wrist that stands. But what they do is they put the wrist in later. See how the arm is bent on the downswing? Now what we're going to do is we're going to show this back and forth to show you how the arm goes from bent to straight during release. See how it's going from bent and how it straightens up here on the upswing? Again, these are some of the denominators of the big cranker type style. We're now going to watch from back view, and basically what we're going to key in here is how the wrist goes from cocked to uncocked. Now watch the wrist position. See how it went from cocked to uncocked? Now again, what we're going to do is slow it down, and we're going to show it back and forth. Watch the wrist go from cocked to uncocked during the release. Again, this is what gives him all them revs on a bowling ball. Now we're going to watch from front view. Watch how the elbow goes in. Okay, what we're going to show you folks at home now is how to put a rev tape on your ball so maybe you can count how many revs you have on it. So what you're actually going to do is once you found your axis, we're going to run this rev tape between your axis and your ball track, basically right above the fingers here. And what you're going to do is every time you see this, it's going to be called a rev. Now what I'm going to have is my son Jimmy come in here and we're going to see how many revs he has on the ball. Now every time we see this tape, it's going to be called a rev. Now I know some of these things sound very, very complicated, and again, we're trying to give you some options, but remember the rotation of the axis is very, very important, and some of you out there throwing straight balls, we're not going to get them scores to go up without getting some strikes. Again, those of you who have that real high tilt, we're losing a lot of hitting power on these urethane finishes. The finishes are much harder than they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. The revolutions, I think you understand how to get more revs on the ball, and these things are really going to help our scores. As you practice, you can use your axis tracer as a guide to tell you on what areas you need to work on. Now here's a little checklist for you. If your ball is rolling out, in other words the tape is getting to 9 o'clock, you might try one of these 4 things. Now a couple of these things here we really didn't talk too much about, and that's how to get faster speed and possibly use a harder ball. Now a harder ball will definitely go further before it grips than a soft ball. So if you're having problems with that rolling out, you might want to go with that harder ball. Now again, if your ball's skidding too far, if we see that your axis tracer's at 7 or 730 when it hits the pins, what we might want to do is use now a softer ball or decrease our ball speed or possibly change where we start the rotation. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day, folks, and I want you to understand that these things are not easy to do. It's going to take a lot of practice. So if you'll practice these things, and again, in your league, we have a term that you bowl best when you think less. So don't be thinking of these things in your league. Be thinking of them in your practice. Now remember, you're not allowed to have that axis tracer on your ball in league play, so you must take that piece of tape off when you bowl in league. But if you will practice these things, believe me, you will start getting more strike power. Now, if you still feel like you're frustrated and you still can't get it, and if you would like to come out, maybe take some private lessons, again, we'll give you the address at Charleston High School where I'm the host pro and I do the teaching there. And maybe we'll work on your individual problem, whether it's topping the ball or whether it's that ball over the thumb hole. Again, hopefully we're going to really try to improve your scores with this tape. Again, like last time, the main thing is to have a good time when you bowl, okay? Boy, must be a hand when they turn the set on.